Okay, so this is basically an introduction to philosophy. So we're going to look at what is philosophy as a way to start this, and then we'll talk a little about how the course is going to be structured, how we're going to move through Western thought. So here's the question: philosophy, or the word philosophy, literally comes from two Greek roots. The first root word philia, and the second Sophia. Sophia is wisdom, and philia is a brotherly love for our Greeks. And our Greeks had several words for love, indicating different spheres or different types of love. So philia is a brotherly love, different from an eros, which is a romantic love, or storge, which is a parental love. And then you may be familiar with agape love. It was adopted by early Christian theologians to denote God's love, right? And for our Greeks, agape love is unconditional love. But unfortunately, the literal translation or definition doesn't get us too far. So here are some more practical definitions of philosophy um, that do a better job in articulating what we have in mind when we talk about what philosophy is. So the first, the doggedly persistent effort to be clear. This is very much a focus on the analytic side of philosophy, that we're using reason and rationality to be absolutely clear about not just what we're talking about, but how we understand and express. Second definition there, the queen of the sciences. This has a lot to do with Aristotle, that really most of the disciplines that we think of, it was they began as philosophical inquiry. So if you think about someone like Aristotle, who's the first to write on biology, he's the first to do political science, he's the first to write on logic, on ethics, on literary criticism. So really, many of the disciplines we think of began as philosophical explorations. But it's really the third definition there that I think does the best job of articulating what philosophy is, and it is the attempt to arrive at reasoned answers to significant human questions that science cannot answer. Right? That science, these are questions that are outside of the purview of science. And I think this is the best because it's really really in our time, we've seen science move into so many different realms or parts of the human condition, that it's difficult to imagine that there are still questions out there that science doesn't have a handle on. But just to give you a couple, you can think about questions of ethics, right? Of moral decision making. Science does a great job telling us how things happen. Science does a terrible job telling us whether or not something should have happened. Right? So here, science, even though moral decision making, ethics are essential to humans and to human development, science really can't give us any help there. So for that sort, we rely on philosophy. And you can think of many other questions as well. Questions of love, of the significance of death. I mean, think about go to your nearest scientist. Go to your go to your family doctor and say, listen, doc, I think it's love. Can you check me out? And of course, they're going to point to things like uh, increased pulse. They're going to look at brain activity. They're going to look at chemicals that are, that are bathing your brain. Um, but, even those things do not make up um, what we think of when we think of love. So here again, philosophy can give us some help. So when thinking about philosophy, here are the significant branches of philosophy. And there are further subdivisions within these branches, but for our purposes, we're just going to look at these largest branches. So first, the first is the branch of metaphysics. You're going to see that prefix meta. You'll see that again. That simply means beyond. So a metaphysics is going to look at questions that are beyond, physics really, right? Beyond the physical. So beyond, maybe it's best to give an example. So, so when we think about, what makes up reality, what makes up the universe, we say, okay, everything is made of matter. Everything is stuff, right? So we make that assertion, but then if you think about those things that are happening in your head right now, right? Those thoughts, right? Your first question is, are thoughts real? And if we say, well, yes, thoughts are real, then the second question is obviously, well, what are they made of? Are they material? Are they matter? And if not, then there must be two types of stuff in the universe, right? Material, matter, physical stuff, and then mental stuff. That is a metaphysical assertion. The second is logic. Logic is going to look at how we reason, our human capacity to think rationally, how it functions. It's going to look at how we come to conclusions, how we use evidence to support those conclusions, how our intellect works. Epistemology, it's going to look at the study of knowledge, how we know something, that is how we come to know something, and then how we know that we know something. So here you might think about someone like John Locke. You may be familiar with John Locke from a sociology or psychology class. John Locke said that we are all born a tabula rasa, right? We're all born a blank slate. And what he means by this is that we don't have any ideas from the get-go. We're born with nothing in our minds. And this is an epistemological assertion that if you say that, or if you take the position that we're born with nothing, no ideas, then everything we know, all our knowledge, comes from experience. So that if you were born into a coma, would you have dreams? And the answer would be no if you took that position. So epistemology is the study of knowledge. Ethics is a little slippery, a little more slippery, a little more difficult than the others in that, ethics, the word ethos is the Greek word, means character. And when we talk about ethics, we don't necessarily mean character or your integrity or what kind of person you are. And even if we take the other word morals, it comes from the Latin moralia, which simply means manners, right? But again, ethics is another branch of philosophy, and it's going to look at rules and guidelines for judging human actions, figuring out the good life, right, etc. And then lastly, aesthetics. Aesthetics is going to look at the study of beauty, right? So things like philosophy of music, philosophy of architecture would fall under aesthetics. So those are the major branches of philosophy. And the second part of our introduction here is how we're going to approach this course overall. The way we're going to approach it is to look at the history of Western philosophy or Western thought, and we're going to move really chronologically from the 5th century BC, well, earlier than that, 6th century BC, all the way up through the 20th century. So we'll start with those very first Western philosophers and make our way all the way into not present day philosophy necessarily, not looking at semiotics and things like that, but at least get us into 20th century existentialism, feminism, things like that. But again, we're going to traverse this chronologically, paying attention to those most significant players in the history of philosophy along the way.